the ad.
Oh no, you won't get paid $1, Frank.
Shh. And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. We've got a couple great guests coming up to talk about all sorts of fascinating matters relating to UFOs. And let me bring in my co-host, Chant Hanna, to do the honors of introducing them both. Good morning, Chant. Good afternoon.
Good morning. How are you, Frank?
I'm doing fine. Ready to go.
Yes, we're going to have a great show today. I'm going to introduce some really special people. I really enjoy talking with them. We've had one of them multiple times on a few of our panels throughout the year. And I'll start off with Keith Arem. He brings over 20 years directing, producing, and creative leadership experience at PCB Productions, Virgin Interactive and Electronic Arts. Avidly curious and fascinated by immersive worlds, Arem brings his visions to life through directing, writing, and producing. Keith's passion began with Contagion, Capitol Records, followed by his work in the game industry as talent director for gaming blockbuster franchises such as Call of Duty, Ghost Recon, Rainbow Six, Deadpool, Persona, and Titanfall. Arem's work placed him as one of the leading directors in the game industry, directing celebrities such as Sam Worthington, Gary Oldman, Ed Harris, Michael Keaton, Idris Elba, and others. Arem launched Los Angeles-based PCB Productions, where he focuses on immersive content creation by blending technology with entertainment. Directing and producing over 600 titles, Arem has been at the forefront of combining emerging technologies into traditional storytelling. Arem's creative appetite is a combination of vision and execution. Arem's award-winning graphic novel and cinematic app, INFEX, attracted millions of interactions through a unique alternate reality experience. Arem's immersive cross-media motion picture, Phoenix Incident, featured an elaborate viral marketing campaign, generating millions of engagements worldwide. In addition to his upcoming game franchises, Arem is currently developing his first original television series, as well as producing multi-platform new media ventures for VR, AR, and emerging platforms, including Opal Digital 360 displays and AXD surround sound. PCB's clients include Sony, Blizzard, Activision, Microsoft, Ubisoft, DreamWorks, Universal, Nintendo, Digital Domain, 2K, Electronic Arts, Fox, and Disney. One of our other guests, Dean Alioto, I have had the privilege and honor of interviewing multiple times. He's a great individual we've come to know and has become a friend of Frank and ours. He studied film at both University of Southern California and San Francisco State University, predating both The Last Broadcast and The Last Blair Witch Project. Alioto's found footage movie, Alien Abduction, Incident in Lake County, features a family being abducted by aliens, as told from the point of view of a family member's home video camera. The footage was purportedly found by a sheriff in Lake County. Alioto's theatrical film debut, Crashing Eden, won several national and international awards. The dark satire was praised by Variety, singling out Alioto's writing and his ability to work with actors. Alioto's second film, L.A. Dicks, told the story of two Los Angeles detectives who pitched their real-life cases to Hollywood. The film went on to receive the Spirit Award at the Toronto International Rebel Fest Film Festival. Thriving on writing and directing movies in various genres, Alioto's next film was the epic western Shadowheart. In addition to filmmaking, Alioto is a drummer and enjoys playing with his fellow musicians in the band Uncle Bob and the Wonderland Express. Welcome, both of you, to our show. We're so glad to have you here with us today.
Good morning, Keith and Dean.
Good morning.
Can I make one little change?
Yes, please do.
Can we flip those bios? Can we flip those bios? Can I?
Right.
Is it too late for that?
Wanted to ask you about that interesting viral campaign that you had, Keith. My understanding is the department, the DOJ kind of went after you on that. What's the story behind that?
That was a very interesting experience. So when we created the film, the idea was that the film was going to inspire people to jump on their phones and start Googling all the facts behind the Phoenix Lights and all the incidents that were sort of tied to the conspiracies around that time and that incident. So we had created fake news sites, missing persons sites. We had investigative journalists and all these social media characters. We had about 20 websites that we created and about a dozen social media characters. And they would blog and point to all of this hidden footage that we shot while we were shooting the movie. And we kind of hid it all over the internet like a scavenger hunt. So people would find all the footage. And if they heard about our story, if they looked it up, they wouldn't find the film site. They would find some real site. And we partnered up with Fandango and Loot Crate and Shazam and AMC and Regal and all these big like corporations that would normally never support an independent film, and especially a UFO film talking about the subject matter we were doing. But that was also in conjunction with all these hidden websites we had. So we have this one site that fortunately is still up. It's called MaricopaMissing.com. And it was the original site that was this missing persons, very official looking site that you could go there and you'd see these cases, these long-term unresolved cases of these four guys that went missing back in March of 1997. And we're not asking for any money. We're not asking for anyone else to report any other cases. It's just really investigating these four disappearances. And if you go there, it's pretty authentic. So I had it hidden, privately registered through a European ISP. And basically nothing would come back to me, because if people saw Keith Arem and Call of Duty and everything else, they would know that this is just a viral campaign. So we got this very interesting, very scared letter from the legal department from our company in Germany, where we had it privately registered. And they said that the United States government is demanding that they turn over all of our personal information to them within the next 48 hours, or they were going to hand us over to the U.S. authorities. And so we were like, what the heck is this? So we get this attached dossier, and it's like this 7-page breakdown of our website, one of our websites, this Maricopa Missing site. And it's basically accusing us that we're impersonating a government agency. We're not a .gov or anything, but that we are using the site as bounty hunters to track down these missing guys who are basically actors from our movie. And it was a $500,000 fine and a 5-year imprisonment.
Nice.
And so they had no idea that these were just actors and these were made up characters. They didn't investigate the people. They just thought we were using the public to track these guys down. And so it was a little tense for a couple of days. And we got our lawyers on the phone with the DOJ, and they all had a good laugh about it. And they said, well, just move the disclaimers to the front page. And so if you go there, you'll notice at the bottom, it says we're not affiliated with the Department of Justice in any way. But what was really interesting was that campaign had been going for 2 years before the film started. And we were at Comic-Con and a number of other places where we'd have missing persons posters and other things. And there's an 800 number there that you can call. And it's a real number. You can call it. There's hidden extensions that we give out. And if you leave a message, you actually opt into our viral campaign, and then it transcribes your message and has a WAV file that we can then put up on our websites. So it's kind of a fun, what we call an ARG, an alternate reality game. And it really pulled people in, very similar to what the Blair Witch Project did and what Dean did on his projects to begin with. And we were kind of following suit with that and then bringing it for our film.
Nice. So you basically got investigated by the Department of Justice because of your viral campaign and fictional characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Keith, you based the movie off the Phoenix Lights incident, which is something that really happened back in '97.
Yes.
What was it about that particular case that got your attention?
Well, I grew up in Arizona. The thing that was really fascinating is that everyone in Arizona kind of knows that event because 30,000 people witnessed this fleet of lights that went from the Nevada border all the way down across the state, crossed over, the airspace in Phoenix. There's reports that the airport may have shut down for a half hour, that they scrambled F-16s from Luke Air Force Base. And there was these weird conspiracies about it because the governor first denied it, and he brought out his chief of staff in an alien costume with handcuffs and said that's who was responsible. But then when he stepped down from office, he actually came out and said he did see a spacecraft or multiple spacecraft. John McCain came out and started an investigation. The vice mayor did an investigation. She was sort of ousted because of all of her prying into what was going on. But there were so many other things that were going on during that time that, Arizona had an unbelievably high number of disappearances and missing persons cases and suicides. They had a rise in cattle deaths, unexplained cattle deaths. But most importantly, that week was when the Hale-Bopp comet was coming the closest point to the Earth, and people were going out to see it because you could see it with the naked eye. And the Heaven's Gate cult, which used to be based in Phoenix, had just moved 400 miles away to Rancho Santa Fe.
Right.
And when they saw this comet, there was a shadow that was in the trail of the comet, and they thought that this may have been a spaceship coming to take them off the planet, and it was the largest mass suicide in U.S. history. So all those things all happened within about 10 days of each other. And two of the pilots that were from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base who flew the A-10s that were reportedly the ones who dropped the flares that the military blamed the sighting on, two of those pilots died mysteriously immediately after the sighting, within about a month, one of the guys that was involved, and then his training pilot. So I thought that growing up in Arizona and knowing all these stories, being able to tell a fictional story of my characters weaving through this history could be a great way to inspire people to start to doing the research and looking into the conspiracies behind this. But I was kind of formulating an idea about this. And while I was working on the Call of Duty series, we used to work with a tremendous amount of, and still do, a lot of military advisors and other people that come from all walks of the military. And a lot of these guys, knowing I came from Arizona, would, after our sessions and working with the actors, would then come and say, hey, well, if you're from Arizona, you know about the Phoenix Lights, right? And I was like, of course, everyone knows about the Phoenix Lights. And they would say, yeah, but do you know what really happened? And these would be guys that would be sharing stories with me about the pilot sightings and what happened, and didn't want to go on record because of some of the way that the pilots and military get treated when they would report things that were unidentified. And going back to our conversation from last week, that was like a really big thing. A lot of these pilots, it's one of the first times that you're seeing pilots actively coming forward and risking being chastised within the military. So I was sort of getting wind of this 5 or 6 years ago, or a little bit more, when I was writing my script. So I decided to sort of incorporate this idea of a Navy pilot coming forward and admitting to a military engagement that took place over the Estrella Mountains back in '97, and weave the story of my guys who witnessed this event, all in the backdrop of all these different conspiracy theories and other ideas that was going on in Arizona at the time. So it was a great first movie to kind of play in a fictional space.
Wanted to let our listeners know who are not aware of this event. There are some people out there that are not familiar with this mass sighting that occurred over the U.S. states of Arizona, Nevada, and the Mexican state of Sonora on March 13th in 1997. Keith, your Phoenix Incident film was launched in 2016 nationwide in theaters, over 500 cities with Cinemark, AMC, and Regal Theaters, and expanded its release in 2016 with Fathom Events, using those theaters to stream a broadcast of that movie. Premiered this movie also at UFO Congress with Alejandro Rojas and at the Roswell Festival a couple years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was phenomenal. This is my first film, and I've been working in games and music and animation and other things for years, but to kind of take my student film. This was just for me to kind of learn how to get behind the camera, to be able to have that much reception and sort of get introduced to this amazing community was phenomenal. And to have the Alejandro and the International UFO Congress be able to host us, and we shot a roundtable there. We interviewed maybe 200 eyewitnesses and also UFO experts in the community. And that was really sort of my entry into this world that I really didn't know a lot about. I'd done a lot of research, but didn't know a lot of the people in the community. And so going to Roswell, going to the IUFOC, being at Alien Con, and becoming friends with Nick Pope and Stanton Friedman and Alejandro Rojas and Lee Spiegel. These were the kind of my mentors, and started teaching me the ropes of what I really needed to pay attention to now that I did a movie that was really stirring.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, what that project was regarding Nick Pope, Stanton Friedman, Lee Spiegel, and Alejandro Rojas. Can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So when we were launching the film, Fathom Events was going to do a nationwide release of the film in 500 cities. And as part of that, they had asked us to produce some additional content that would be unique to the broadcast of the film. So we'd show the film and then have this additional content. So we premiered the movie at the International UFO Congress for about 5,000 or 6,000 people. And then immediately after that, Stanton Friedman and Alejandro Rojas and Lee Spiegel and Nick Pope all sat down with me for about a couple hours, and we shot this roundtable discussion called Full Disclosure. And we really went into the fact and fiction behind the movie and the Phoenix Lights, and talked about the event, talked about the reality of, why these things happen. These events have been reported over years, especially the Black Triangle craft that were kind of called out both at the Phoenix incident and Belgium and a lot of other events in the past. And so it was amazing for me just to be in the room with these guys and asking them the same kind of questions that we're talking here, but really dive into these cases and understand why there's similarities, why the military has been reluctant to reporting these events, and why my film was sort of touching on a lot of these points, and leading into why we did so interesting about our film and what's been happening recently is we shot a lot of footage from the military's point of view in our movie. We shot on FLIR cameras. We actually involved a lot of real military sort of footage and composited our footage into that, so it looks very realistic. And that was released as part of our UFO campaign, or sort of our viral campaign. So when all the footage from the Nimitz and for the Tic Tac footage and the gimbal footage started to come out, people thought this was part of our viral campaign, and our movie shot up into the top 10 on iTunes this last year and has been doing very, very well again. And so I was never intending to hoax people or try to sort of use that to sort of betray sort of the interest in researching what was going on. Our interest was really to promote the idea that younger generations will start researching what's really going on, and it's finally starting to come out.
And initially, you had mentioned before we came on that Alejandro tried to debunk you when he first saw your viral campaign. Between the Justice Department and Alejandro trying to debunk you, you were having a tough road to get down.
We were having a kind of a rough start because I had started the viral campaign a couple of years before, and we're creating these websites and creating these viral characters, these social media characters, and starting to release footage. And Alejandro, who's very well researched and very knowledgeable and really pays the most attention to all the details that are out there, and was also hosting a show out in Phoenix. He found our viral campaign on a number of different areas, and he reached out to one of our main investigators, our quote unquote investigators, and was talking about the fact that he had footage. John Greenwald from the Black Vault also had information, and he wrote to us, and a number of other people who were very well researched started to write to us because they saw this footage we were putting out that looked very real. And I was still about a year away from releasing the movie, and I couldn't spill the beans. I couldn't acknowledge what we were doing. So I was sort of playing silent, which did not go over well with Alejandro. So Alejandro started doing more and more research, and one of the investigators in our campaign on one of our sites, mind you, we have dozens and dozens of sites. on one of the sites, there was a picture of one of the investigators, and it was an actor. It was one of our actors, James Patrick Stewart, who portrays one of the investigators. And James Patrick Stewart is also well known because he was in Seinfeld, he was in General Hospital, he's been on a lot of movies and television shows. I work with him in a lot of video games. And someone at Alejandro's company recognized that actor, recognized him from our viral campaign, and put it together that all these were connected. And he said, "This must be fake." And he put out this massive article and on his broadcast show and said, "I don't know who these guys are, but if this is fake, that means this must be fake. That means this is fake." And he connected everything a year before everything was coming out. And I knew people were going to figure this out, but I didn't figure it was going to be Alejandro so quickly. Mm-hmm. So I was actually talking with Alejandro's boss about doing a television show about the documentary about what we were going to do. So I reached out to his boss and I said, "Hey, your guy is about to unravel everything that we're about to do for this movie." And he said, "Yeah," he goes, "he takes this really seriously. He polices the internet, and he doesn't like hoaxes doing things." Yes. And I said, "Well, I'm trying to hoax. I'm trying to educate people and get them excited about the subject matter, because when you go to the UFO festivals, the youngest person in the room is like 55 or 60 years old. You don't see video gamers, and you don't see these 18-year-olds excited about aliens, but every movie and every video game is about aliens. We just sort of take it for granted that aliens exist. It's like, how can they not? But all the research is all done by a different generation. So this movie was really meant to sort of inspire a younger generation to get involved, which it's been doing. And with 20 million people, we were starting to really do that. And so Alejandro's boss says, "Yeah," he goes, "you got to call him and you got to talk to him." And so I called up Alejandro, and boy, that first conversation, he goes, "Well, you know what? It's my job to expose people like you and let them know." Right? And I was like, hey, this is not what it's about. And so we had this like 2-hour conversation, and over the period of this conversation, he got it. He understood what I was trying to do. And he goes, "Wow, you're not trying to hoax things. You are trying to bring this awareness through, making people think this is real. And then they find all the research." Right. And so we ended up becoming really good friends over the period of this phone call. And at the end of the call, we kind of had a moment of silence there, and he said, "Well," I was like, "Well, what are we going to do?" And he goes, "Well, you got to come on my show and you got to talk about this." And I was like, well, wait a second. My viral campaign's is still going. My movie's not coming out for another year. How are we going to do that? And he goes, "Well, I can't ignore this. I've already, put out articles. I've already talked about this. I have to tell people what's going on." So we came up with this really interesting idea, because he has millions of listeners to his show. And so what we decided to do was we came up with a hashtag that says "Disclose Now." And any part of our viral campaign that we released would be this hashtag "Disclose Now." And anytime the audience saw that, and we revealed this to all of his listeners, to say, "Look, we have the fiction of the movie, and we don't want the moviegoers and the regular audience to blow sort of the surprise of what's going on, but we also don't want people to think we're hoaxing. So if you're in the community and you see "Disclose Now," that means it's us. And you know that we're not faking anyone. This is for you guys to have inside knowledge. But for the rest of the world, kind of keep the secret so they kind of enjoy the spoilers for it." And that's how we ended up launching the movie. And we went to the IUFOC and then premiered it there, and then the rest kind of went forward.
So question, how did you meet the person that we all love to have on our panels on a regular, and that's Dean Alioto?
So an equally interesting story, and Dean's going to probably, I want Dean to kind of weigh in from his perspective, because we had a really good laugh about this much after the fact. So when I was writing the script for the movie, I was approached by a very large film producer and an investor. This investor that was interested in financing the film was working with this film producer, and they really loved the concept of what I was trying to do, this idea of a documentary that has found footage in it and putting this thing together. And the investor said, "Well, we actually have the rights to this other film that's a found footage alien film, and we want to make this film, and we want you to direct it." So I was like, okay. And so they presented me with the story and the idea of it. And what it turns out, it was based on this film that had been done years before and had been released very secretly and had been remade. But it was really the original, the very first found footage film out there, before Blair Witch, before anything else. And the film had sort of been lost, and then videos of it had kind of leaked online. And as each of the videos had been copied, especially because they were analog copies, they had been degraded, and it made the footage look much, much more authentic, to the point that it became like this real debated sighting and this sort of alien abduction story of this family in this cabin in the woods that witnessed this event. And so it was a different story than what I was doing, but kind of in the same space. And so we'd gone forward about this. They wanted me to direct it. It turns out that the producer said, well, actually, the guy who originally did this, he's going to direct it. And so they were going to finance both films. And then finally, the whole thing kind of fell apart, as a lot of things do in Hollywood. I went on my own way, had already written my script and shot some test footage, and went and shot my film and never ended up moving forward with them. Turns out years later, I ended up getting introduced to Dean, and it was Dean's film. It was Dean that was doing it. And the whole controversy between him directing and me directing, and these film producers trying to kind of fight between us to do this movie, had kind of stopped us from meeting. And when we realized how sort of similar-minded we were in our same sort of interests and approach to filmmaking, and this idea of sort of inspiring the audience through the kind of films we were making, we've become pretty close friends. And so it's been a great experience getting to know Dean, and we ended up hanging out at the International UFO Congress with Alejandro, who was the one who ended up putting us together. And now here we are together on the same show together, and Dean and I are excited doing some projects together.
Is that true, Dean?
I can neither confirm nor deny anything that Keith ever says. No, it's pretty accurate, and that's a nice version of what we encountered with this producer, where she was working both of us. And it's a bummer, because it was funny. Keith and I hung out the other day, and I turned to Keith and I said, it's really sad that the producers didn't realize that if they teamed us up, they could have done so much more damage in the marketplace, and really blown this out huge, instead of trying to take one from another. But
right.
Yeah, and again, Alejandro, he's the great what's the word, yenta. And again, Keith is, when we were at Alien Con, which is where Keith and I met, he has, his mind works as an engineer, which I appreciate, because I'm always, if you're a filmmaker, you are an engineer, or you're a magician. I mean, this is what we do. And Keith looks at everything, and it's kind of like, okay, I know that this is how it works, but why? Why don't we do it this way? And we're doing that. The things that I feel like I've done in my career that have done well have always been things where it's like, I know they're doing it this way, but I'm excited about looking at it now from this angle. And so back when I did the original in '89, the original UFO Abduction, we didn't have online, really personal computers at the time to this extent. So we used smoke signals and Morse code to get all of our viral. No, that's a joke. Campaign around. No, this is an example of Keith, looking at something and doing that, and also we're storytellers. Whether we're working in the space of whether I'm doing TV movies or music videos, commercials, whatever, we're trying to tell stories, and Keith with certainly with the video games, it's all telling stories, and it's the more they're based on actual fact, the more authentic they have, the more they resonate with a person. And so, before found footage, there was the cavemen around the campfire. And so this is just an extension of that.
And Dean, I wanted to talk about you for a moment. You did a Lifetime film that came out last month. Wanted to cover that, and also wanted to mention that you're looking forward to the Fantastic Fest in Austin that does genre films. It's in a month and a half, and it will have the 30th anniversary of your UFO Abduction film there. It will have its first theatrical release there, and it will be released to a dozen theaters. And they premiered Bad Times at Hotel Del Rey and the Halloween movie there. And also there could be possibly a third installment of Alien Abduction. Is that correct?
Yes. So I always joke that UFO abduction has been the gift that keeps on giving. It has more lives than Frankenstein. Just keeps going and going. And this was one of the things where, because it was done a while ago, there were a lot of kids who had seen, if not the original, saw the remake at UPN, Alien Abduction in St. Lake County, also known as the McPherson tape. They grew up with it, and I would get their emails and stuff, and sometimes calls, and all wanting to know if this was real or not, and some of the emails were like, "I still sleep with the lights on," and one woman said she almost went into, she was pregnant, and she said she almost went into pre-labor.
Oh my gosh.
And I at first I got really pissed off because it was kind of like, what's wrong with these parents letting these kids watch, this UPN thing that says, warning, there's graphic footage and whatever at the beginning of it. And then there were a couple filmmakers that came from down in Toronto. I think they're called the Vicious Brothers, and they're great, and they're working the space. And whenever they make a movie, they sneak in a line of one of my films, and so they, I said, I'm really sorry that they did that. You saw that, and they said, "Are you kidding me? This is the beginning of my imagination. I love it. This was fertilizer for me," and so that's been awesome. And Keith is experiencing the same thing, where this is, it boomerangs back. And so the whole way that the Fantastic Fest came back is the guy who's the director of the fest had been a fan for like, I don't know how many years. And he tracked me down and said, "Hey, who has the rights to this? What's going on? This is, your name came up." And I talked about it, and he said, I said, "So funny that we're talking, because next year," this was 2018. I said, "Next year, it's going to be it's been 30 years since this thing came out." And he said, "Okay, so we're doing the 30th anniversary. That's happening. We're going to do it at Fantastic Fest, which is this great genre festival." And as you mentioned, they did the reboot of Halloween. They do tons of big genre stuff. They're kind of like the South by Southwest level of genre film. So he said, we're going to do that, and then our theatrical rights available. And so I thought he was joking at the time, because it's theatrical. This was a VHS, little project. And I said, "Yeah, strangely, yes, they are available." And he said, "All right, well, we're going to do a theatrical release. We'd love to do that if you're cool with that." And so it was just like this insane phone call. And this was on the heels of Alejandro reaching out to me about doing, also in 2018, doing the International UFO Congress Convention, giving a 75-minute lecture, and on the films and the whacked journey that both of them took, and the infamy that surrounds them even to this day. And so it was kind of like it boomeranged back, and because of it, it's introduced me to so many wonderful people in this field that I have been kind of an armchair expert is stretching the truth, an armchair amateur expert forever on UFOs and everything else. So to work, and again, like Keith, to sit across, my first podcast that I ever did was sitting across from Stanton and Travis Walton and Nick Pope and all the luminaries, and it was just insane. And so I feel really lucky to have had an opportunity to be with Stanton and everything. And then that kind of has led to looking at this again from a whole new angle. Where do we take this to the next step? And that's kind of the goal of Wolfram.
Well, I wanted to bring up something interesting, and then bring up something else after that. And that is, you shot Nick Pope's interview last year, and you also did work for Travis Taylor of Ancient Aliens. Can you touch a little bit upon those topics?
Yeah, what I can tell you is that when I was at AlienCon, I had, between I guess February or March, February of 2018. In June of 2018, when I did AlienCon, when I was at IUFOC, I hit on this idea, which was I saw a perspective that hadn't been exploited yet in the UFO genre, or the UFO research field. And so I hit on this idea, and so while I was speaking at AlienCon, I just reached out to Nick and started videotaping him, and I had a list of questions and stuff that were leading us into that direction. And then interviewed Travis, and Travis is interesting because I don't know if you ever saw the movie Sphere, but
Yes.
Crichton. Yeah,
It's been a while, but yeah, I've seen it.
The book is really good. The movie's not. Okay. So anyway, it was about this guy that wrote this kind of briefing, like if we were to, meet UFOs, how would that go down? How would we do disclosure and everything else if it, came to that level, a reveal? And he wrote this thing, and then it actually kind of got out there and kind of circulated, and he became the de facto head in that field in the government. And so he was actually doing this, where he was, created what that first contact would be. And then Ancient Aliens heard about this and brought him on. And so he's pretty new to the genre as well. And so I interviewed him, and I figured he had thought about what that would be like. And so I can't tell you exactly what that perspective is, but it's new, hasn't been done before. And so I interviewed, Nick, who's great, really funny guy. It's really interesting. Both Keith and I, we intersect with all these people, and they all have an awesome sense of humor. When I met Alejandro, I said, okay, I'll speak at the festival, but I'm going to bring levity because everything has it. And if you take things too serious, then they're too brittle and they break. So you have to, have a range of that. And everyone is, great. Earl Grey is hysterical. I mean, everyone. Bassett is funny. I mean, these guys are all, good people. And so, it's just kind of trying to continue that and propagate it in a positive way, and and hopefully uncover. I mean, we're all trying to pull back the sheets on this.
You're going to be doing another project on the road that's close to your heart, and it's a cross between All the President's Men and Close Encounters, which is mystery. And there's an investigative element to it that has a deep throat kind of character. As you were saying when we talked prior to the show, it has a contemporary issue that you have you wanted to mention actually, or make a good point of, and that is newspapers going dead and everything is going online, and the camaraderie of working in person at a newspaper in that close-knit reporter type community in a smaller newspaper is disappearing. It's becoming extinct. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Sure. The basic story is about a reporter and a blogger who it's on the crust. I mean, it's been going on for some time, so it's nothing new that print is on the way out the door, and even though going green is great for the trees and everything, there's just something about that paper landing on your doorstep, opening it up and smelling that chalk, paper, that the smell of it opening, it's like kind of opening a gift on every page, and that tactile thing is going away, and this was kind of coming from my mourning of that, and even though a lot of papers have been able to keep both, some now are phasing out even that, and so it's all online. And so here's a young reporter who's really trying to get his start going before it happens. In his paper, it's been announced that it is going to be ending in 30 days. So he's got 30 days to get his first front page ad, front page, article, and enter a young blogger who comes into it. And he's going to write for the paper, and he's going to be doing his opinions and stuff. And so the story actually starts briefly a year before then, when there is a vehicle that crash lands on the moon, and it's so big that you can't hide it. The government can't hide it. And so it starts from there, and then we cut back to it. The movie begins a year later, and it's these two guys meeting up, and they discover this thread, this conspiracy thread, and they start to tug at it. and it seems to break off, but it doesn't. It keeps pulling and unraveling. And so very much like All the President's Men, it's these two young bucks, if you will, who discover this thing, and it goes on. And the themes that are laid in all throughout is from fake news to respecting the research that goes in. Because opinion bloggers, Huffington Post, all these, great publications, these are just opinionators. Is that a real word, opinionators? I don't know.
Sure it is. It is now.
The opinionator. And so it's hitting on that, and it's also at its core, which is factoring into to my work a lot, is the environment and what we're doing and how we don't have an appreciation for this planet, and everything that we're doing right now is screwing. It's kind of like, we've had a great party, and now we're going to set the party on fire as we leave, so the other people in line don't get to experience it. That's kind of how it is. I mean, it's kind of a crass way to say it, but that's what we're doing this planet. So it's about that and a few other things, but that's high on my list to do as soon as possible and get that going. We're looking at casting right now, so we'll see.
Now,
well, my advice is to gin up some fake documents and put those out there, and that will send the UFO community into a tizzy.
Yeah.
Wanted to mention, forgive me if you mentioned this because my audio broke up. It's my fault, Dean, but my understanding is you're working on a sci-fi thriller related projects where women save themselves in these Jeopardy related or type films. Is that correct? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. So there's been a huge market for years, from the femme fatale way back in the 30s and 40s. Film noir happened after he had dropped the bomb because we had lost our innocence. And so you had all these great Sam Fuller films and Park Avenue and all these awesome films. And Hitchcock made an industry out of it. The man would always save the women at the end. Well, my mother raised 3 boys on her own. We always rented a home. She did it without a credit card. We were all working since we were kids, from paper routes, mowing lawns to paper routes, etc. She was also an activist and had a newsletter across the country. It was about surviving single motherhood. And so she was dragging us. I mean, this is after Vietnam, but she's dragging us to all of these rallies and protests to make sure Vietnam doesn't happen again. And so we went to this like no nukes thing with Jane Fonda as kids and stuff. She dragged us to all these things. And so I look at women as by and large strong, and in a lot of ways stronger than men. And so the idea of these female in jeopardy, having a genre called female in jeopardy is just asinine. And so I thought, how can you work in that space? Because again, it's an opportunity. Keith and I, as you mentioned, looking at a space, how can we look at it from a different angle and get into it and put some more realism into it. And so I started working in the genre. The first thing I did was a supernatural, female in jeopardy, but it's actually more about a woman who suffers from PTSD. She has isolophobia, which is fear of being alone. And so she has to deal with her past in order to remedy her current situation, which is stuck in a cabin out in the woods after an avalanche by herself. And she's got to confront her demons. And so, and she's also gay, which is, for me, putting, diversity injecting into any story. The more you do it, the less you make it this unique thing, the more you normalize it. So it's not an issue. It's just, this is who we are. This is the fabric of who we are. And so I've got a few other things like that. And the TV movie, the Lifetime movie thing I did, was also that concept, real briefly, was about a young girl whose father had passed away a year before she's about to go off to college. And so it's down to the wire. It's like 6 months away, and she's going to be taken off, and her mom hasn't been dating. She's all alone, and she feels protective, and she wants her to have a man and have a husband and be taken care of while she's away. And so she engineers going online and, tracking down a suitor, and everything seems great. Turns out this guy is a complete asshole. And He co-opts the mother and terrorizes them and everything, and ultimately they take this guy out. And the last scene is her, the mother and the daughter realizing that it's okay to be alone. It's okay to have alone time. You don't need to be partnered up. You can have that, and you can have your own life, and that's enough. And so so that's kind of the themes that I'm into exploring in a commercial space.
Dean, is it true that you might be at the Austin Film Festival in November?
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I did at the end of the year, I did this supernatural thriller comedy called Portal, and we're locking distribution right now. And so I'm not sure what the coming out, marketing or plans are going to be for announcing it, but that's one possible thing there. The other is a couple other scripts and projects. So I'll let you know as we get closer there. The thing that we did, Portal, was really fun because, again, that was that concept there is about fake news. And it's in the guise of, here are these guys, these low rent ghost hunters who are the most honest ghost hunters out there. And because of that, they don't have a lot of ratings because they're not seeing ghosts every single time they go out, like all these other ghost shows. And then the shit hits the fan as they start augmenting. And so as they go from real news to fake news, this happens. And yeah.
Wanted to mention, I'm sorry if you already mentioned this, I apologize. Just let me know if you did. James Fox and you are working together on a project. Is that correct?
It's too premature to say that. James, we've intersected on a phone call. And so on a few phone calls and stuff, I'm very, very interested in what James does in this field. Every time he does something, it's usually moving the needle up further. And so he's got this great project that he's been working on for a few years now. And, I've seen the footage. It's amazing. But I can't really, if I can help him in any way, I will. He doesn't need my help. But we're, trying to connect when he's in town here or when I'm in the Bay Area there. And so, yeah.
Before we move back on to Keith again, because I have quite a few questions for Keith I wanted to ask him. I wanted to ask you regarding the panel you were on with us where we reviewed the Unidentified series from the History Channel. Were there any last things you wanted to say about that topic and how your review of it?
Well, we had done a whole bunch of notes that we all took per episode. And as you know, there were about 7 of us on the panel.
Right, yeah. So
I think it would have been the longest podcast in the history of podcasts.
Right.
Broken every episode down. I would say, in summary, random thoughts. I thought it was really well conceived. I thought that some of it was kind of stretching out what was there, but the execution of it was great. I love going back and forth. It reminded me a lot of All the President's Men, where they would go out in the field and then they would come back to the government, and their resources to almost get confirmation. They were very transparent. I mean, that moment where he says, I have to be very careful that I'm not going out, creating this perception that I'm going out looking for answers, that I already know the answer to, or questions I already know the answer to. And so, I think the team's interesting and everything. I know he's controversial, Tom DeLonge, but, screw it. It's because of him that we've got a lot of this information, and he's been pushing that open. And so we should all be rooting for him. And, I wish that there was a little more of his music. I like his music in the series, but it's not about him. And and Lou is a very credible person, and all these people coming out and speaking, I thought that they create a safe space for these guys to do that, which is half of it, because the people that come forward and want to speak, usually the ones who are screaming, hey, look at me, those are the ones you don't really want to be intersecting with. It's the ones that you have to go to, and you have to say, hey, I know that this is sensitive and everything, but can we find a way that we can talk about this and in an integrous way. And so I thought overall it was a success. I love it when Lewis would lose his shit. He would say something. This is real. When are they going to understand? And it might have been a bite, like maybe he was yelling at the craft service guy. He really wanted his peanut butter with chunky. And he's like, this is real. But they cut it in so it could be about UFOs. Who knows?
Oh my God, that's
well,
funny.
UFO folks can be a really tough crowd when it comes to criticizing TV shows, and I think it went over really well.
Yeah, and they should be. They should be, because God knows there's enough stuff out there, and Keith and I are giving it a whole other dimension as well.
Yes.
But so it's absolutely.
Great. Keith, you have your own recording studio and you direct a lot of talent regarding performances with folks having to do with dialogue and video games, which is absolutely amazing. And Dean will probably deny this, but he said that he thinks your work is phenomenal.
I never said that.
Keith, you have a full house with a lot of projects going on regarding video games and more. Can you just flesh that out and let us know, kind of allow the listener to visualize what an average day is for you, what it's like? I'm sure it's not the same every day.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest benefit and challenge to my work, is that every day is something completely different. I'm kind of a generalist in the sense that I have an engineering background and a technology background, but I'm a creative at heart. I started in the music industry, so I was a composer, and I was with Biohazard and Contagion back when I was a kid. So I was starting off, writing and producing and touring, playing music, and got into films and video games from a production standpoint. And even though I was a storyteller, I always loved that just fascination of going into a movie theater and just losing myself. And I never really wanted to lose that magic. So I stayed away from films intentionally just because I didn't want to really know how they were made. But as I got into production and through music and then sound, that turned into me directing. And I started working with actors when I was a kid, just sort of because I was the audio guy, and suddenly they'd throw me in with the celebrities because I was the only one who knew how to use the equipment, and I had to record the actors. And as I started to really enjoy that process, a lot of the actors and the celebrities would come to me and say, when are you doing your stuff? I mean, we love the video games that we're doing, but when are you going to be doing your stuff? And I remember I'd done a session years ago with Gary Oldman, and he was just this amazing performer to direct, because you're just sitting back and watching him do his craft, and you're guiding sort of the overall direction of the project, but you're not, you're just watching more than and learning from him than anything as a director. So, but he turned to me and he said, when are you doing your projects? When are you going to be doing your work? And so I had started to write graphic novels and comic books because I hadn't any experience writing screenplays. I've been working on scripts for games and other things, but never really knowing how to do a motion picture or television show. So graphic novels were sort of the first inroads for what I was doing. And my first one that I was working on was this dream that I had about these angels and demons that were fighting in this purgatory, this war called the Purgatory Wars. And it was this post-apocalyptic heaven where these legions were fighting these endless battles with no end in sight and not even knowing what caused this war. And because heaven had been destroyed, souls couldn't sort of recreate through the cycle of life. So these angels started sending their strongest warriors down to earth and harvesting these souls into the Purgatory Wars. And so anyways, this big dream that I had, I ended up sort of writing this story as a comic book or as a graphic novel. And a friend of mine who was a large film writer saw this and he said, wow, this is a graphic novel. You have to get this published. And we sent a few pages over to Image Comics, and it ended up becoming the #1 selling book for Image. And it turned out to be the top, I think, 17 top selling graphic novel in the country for that year. And it was this book called Ascend. And so that was really my first inroads into creating, as well as working in the studios and music and everything else. And so over the years, I've sort of developed my career into two sides. One has been working in video games and in music and in television and film as more on the service side, like coming in to direct, coming in to produce, coming in to sort of oversee post-production. And so I built PCB Productions here in Los Angeles, and we have 5 stages now. And we work on about 30 or 40 projects a year, mainly video games. So I've done 11 of the Call of Duty games. I've done the majority of the Ghost Recon and Rainbow Six series, did a lot of the Tony Hawk games. So over the past 20 years, this is our 20th year now being in business as PCB. It really gave me a great opportunity to work with development teams and other creators and collaborate with these amazing technical teams to really develop these big franchises. And that gave me the inspiration and the guidance, along with these great actors like Gary and other actors, to start to take my own projects like these comic books and develop my own work. So the second half of my company is now PCB Entertainment, and that is creating these motion pictures, television shows, original video games, graphic novels, and doing projects based on my own stories. And so that's been the most fulfilling and rewarding sort of experience, is to continue to be relevant in the production space and working on these big franchises. And this year we had Monster Hunter and Judgment and Catherine and Persona, all these big games that are coming up to get to work on. But on the side, I get to work on projects now. I've got a project going with Wesley Snipes. I've got a prequel for Phoenix. I've got this new Infex animated series that's coming out. I've got 2 other films that are in development. So my day kind of goes back and forth between maintaining our studios for all of our clients and our big projects there, and then being creative on my own and finding time to do my own work. So it's a great time.
Now, Keith, you're the first person we've ever had on the show who's got a big background in the gaming. And there's been a lot of talk over the years, recent years, among theoretical physicists about the simulation theory. And I'd like to know if you're familiar with that and if you have any thoughts about it.
It's amazing. I'm a huge fan of films like The Matrix and Total Recall, and even films like Inception that sort of tie into a lot of the theories that are there. And a lot of even some of the video games, Blade Chronicles that I worked on and a number of other ones kind of deal with the idea that our world is a simulation. I'm always fascinated by the ideas of alternate reality. And it's always a great late night discussion to kind of get into is are we living in a simulation, and what are the different alternate realities that sort of exist based on our universe and where we're at. I'm not as well versed in some of the theoretical science and some of the proof that we have outside of the entertainment topics that we've talked about, but it for someone like myself that always has that what if sort of scenario, and what if we are in the simulation, and what if our reality is not what we think it is, or a path that's a different alternate version of where we could have gone, is something that I do spend a lot of time thinking about creatively, and I'm always fascinated in hearing the real researchers kind of debate it and talk about it.
It is pretty interesting. I've heard a couple of debates, big roundtables with the theoretical physicists. Usually at the end, the conclusion is, well, what do you think? What do you think the chances are that this is the world that we're really living in, just a big simulation? And they say, nah. But, they talk about it anyway. That's usually the conclusion. But another thing that has come up in relation to contactees, and that is a number of them have said that the experience they had seemed like literally a different reality, a different level of reality, maybe even a virtual reality. And since that is tied into gaming a little bit, I wanted to get your feedback on that as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. The abduction phenomenon has been something that has fascinated me for years, and I have a film that I'm actually writing that kind of deals with the topic. But what was interesting for me, and this is kind of a hot topic within the community, and for anyone who has a different opinion, I'm not meaning to be controversial or upsetting to them. But when I did a lot of research, especially for this film, the majority, almost all of the abduction cases that I researched had come out through hypnotherapy and had come out through this process of this regression hypnotherapy, and then really going back and discovering what had happened to them. And I was fascinated by this sort of research that was being done on night terrors, and the idea that sleep disorders had a really big impact on a lot of these abductees as a potential explanation for why they may have happened. And there's a sleep disorder. It's known as a night terror, and it's where when you go to sleep, your body goes into a form of paralysis where you don't act out your dreams. Because if you have a dream that you're running and you're jumping off a cliff and you got out of bed and you were to actually run through your glass plate window or something else like that, you would obviously cause severe injury to yourself. So your body has this natural mechanism to sort of paralyze itself during sleep. You can still turn over, but you don't really get up. In night terrors, it's a sleep disorder, and it actually happens to the majority of people at some point during their life. Some people are more prone to it than others, but almost everyone has had it at one point in their life or another. And typically what happens is that the person wakes up during an activity of high REM activity. And during REM activity, your brain and your sleep cycle, you're at a very heightened state of awareness within your dreams. And but when you wake up with a night terror, the body doesn't release the paralysis that it's still under. So you sort of wake up mentally in sort of a disoriented and heightened state, but your body feels like it's being held down because of the paralysis. And if you've ever had anesthesia or something, you kind of almost feel like pressure or there's someone holding you down. And when that happens, you're very sensitive to light. There is a sense that there's someone or a presence in the room, and it is terrifying. And it's so prevalent that it's been documented in almost every culture around the world for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And in South America, there's a cat that sits on your chest and steals your soul. And in Europe, there's a troll that sits in the corner and does this. And in Japan, it's an old hag that is causing this spell to be placed on you. But it's a very irrational kind of feeling because you're in this REM cycle, and a lot of people just end up thinking it's a nightmare and they fall back asleep and they don't recall it. But for people who are awake and can retain that, all they know is that there was someone in the room, someone holding them down, and they're terrified. And a number of these people have gone into regression therapy to kind of find out what happened to them because they can't remember what's there. And what's amazing about hypnoregression therapy is that, and I'm not sure the actual scientific term for it, or I can't remember it offhand, but what's interesting is that when you go and regress back in hypnotherapy, you are very susceptible to suggestion. And I've had friends who have gone through it who have cured themselves of fear of flying or to stop smoking and other things. But if there is sort of any type of suggestion or even self-suggestion that there was something else that happened, that memory then becomes absolutely cemented into your memory, and then it becomes real. No matter whether it was suggested to you or not, whether it was a thought that came afterwards, it becomes part of your memory. Right. And from all the cases that I studied, that was the case, that they had all gone through some form of hypnoregression therapy. And in the United States, though, we don't have old hags or cats or trolls or other things that are part of our culture, but UFOs and aliens have been. And so I think that from the research I was doing, and again, no disrespect to the cases that are outside of this, but for the majority of the ones I saw that were this, they were sort of finding that a lot of this may have come through a suggestion, even a self-suggestion during this hypnoregression hypnotherapy. And so anyway, so I was always fascinated by that because some of the stories, and I've met people like Travis and other people who have been through some obviously life-altering experiences. And so I was trying to rectify sort of that feeling of what they've gone through versus the research that has been done, and trying to find a film or a television show that can explore that.
That's an interesting topic. And Dean, I was going to ask you a little bit about that topic. Could you touch on the sleep paralysis subject? Yeah.
First of all, hag, I think, is now older, grumpy person. I think that's the nomenclature now. It's interesting because there's this footage of this dog that's online that's gone viral, and you see the dog lying there, and it's like a greyhound, which are great runners, and its legs are moving as it's sleeping, and they're like picking up speed as it's going. and then all of a sudden it pops up and runs straight into the wall and bounces back and is like completely, shook. And so that paralysis is absolutely, much needed. The thing that I'm kind of, my daughter, when she was younger, she had childhood epilepsy. And so what that would mean is that it was nocturnal. So at night, she would have these seizures. And then she would go into a state where, we would go to the hospital. She was given Ativan as a muscle relaxant to prevent the seizing from continuing. And she started drawing these pictures that look like kind of overhead schematics, and it had like these patterns. Some of it spiral, some of it was straight across like a grid. It was like these boxes, one after another, all lined up, and almost like a checkerboard that was kind of misshapen. And she said this is what she sees when she leaves her body. And so she would see her getting loaded into the ambulance and heading out. So she was having out-of-body experiences. And this went on for a couple of years when she was having these seizures before we got the proper medication and started doing other things, energy work, in order to dial that back and make it containable. But I believe we leave our body every night. I subscribe to that wholeheartedly. I think, not to go too far out on the esoteric limb, but
that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Let's feed that animal then. So I think what's going on is, with regards to simulation, this is one big school. There's nothing more depressing to me to think that here's a child who happens to grow up into a home with two crackhead parents, and now they've got mental and physical issues because of that genetically, and they're predisposed to it, and then they become homeless. So that's the only shot that they get at life. That doesn't seem fair. I believe that we've been here many a time. There's a thing called xenoglossy, which is a condition where, say, a child at like 4 years old or 3 years old, he starts talking. They start talking a language that they wouldn't know. How would someone who grew up in Nebraska, born there, how can they speak Mandarin? And so that is on record, as being a legit phenomenon, or being able to sit at the piano and play perfect. I think those are residuals from past life. And so I like to believe that we're all evolving and we're all getting there to the finish line. I mean, unfortunately, technology is such right now that Moore's law, which tracks development of mankind and technology, is now so bifurcated that it's no longer running concurrent. Technology is shot straight up. So it's like a cat, a young little kitten that's running down a hallway and its hind legs are running past it and tripping over. And that's kind of where we're at. But with regards to how we all, at night when we go, I think we need to shut down. I think we need to, maybe we go into our higher self and reconnect. There's some people that have tons of energy that are amazing, like seeing Paul McCartney at Dodger Stadium last night. Again, he's 77 years old, running around 3 hours, 3 sips of water. That's all he needs. It's like, holy crap, this is insane. And so I look at that, and there's stories of people that feel sluggish and stuff, and they're being told last life you had too much of your soul in you, and so now you're only having so much. But just to bring it back, I think that paralysis and stuff, I believe to an extent, because I've experienced it a few times, is us maybe re-entering our body, because you will be conscious. It's like I'm aware that I'm kind of in my body space, but I can't move. And you start to panic, and it's the worst. I'm claustrophobic, and so that's the worst for me. I have to calm myself and say everything's going to be okay. Get back in your body, and all of a sudden I can now start to move my body. So I wonder if that's not like OBE, out of body experience, projecting oneself.
These are all good questions. I have a off-the-wall question for both you and Keith, and that is this is totally random. What do you all do if you ever get to the point in your lives where you absolutely have no impetus or drive to do any directing or producing of any kind regarding the kinds of things that you do?
I have no idea what those words mean. That doesn't.
So once a director,
What language
a
is that?
director for life.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. I mean I think Dean and I don't do this. It's not because, well, God knows it's not because of the money. It's there's if you want to make money, there's better ways than trying to be a director or other things. I mean, it's great to be able to support yourself doing this, but I think it's more for the creative and the love of telling these stories. We would be sitting around, like you said earlier, like Dean was talking about, we'd be, cave people sitting around a campfire telling these stories, whatever medium we can tell these in. And I think that's why we move between film and television and games and comics and anything we can tell a story in, because the way the audience experiences stories is right now we're telling a story that would be through a podcast. We're talking stories, every day when we're, telling things to our families. We're telling stories to friends when we're out at a bar or over breakfast. So I think that as a storyteller, to be able to come up with these ideas and take, especially for us, we take things that are inspired by reality and then tell a what if story and talk about an alternate universe and other realities that are there. And that really fascinates people. And I think people love the idea that they can take their world and play and sort of envision a different life in a different place and either empathize with those characters, or in the case of a video game, get to play those characters. So I think that for us, once a storyteller, always a storyteller.
There's a director out there. I'm sure you remember him. He did Deer Hunter, Michael Cimino, and he actually evolved into kind of a different person over a period of time. He was not the same person as when he first directed the Deer Hunter. In fact, he evolved into actually quite a completely different person. Where I'm going with this is, are you the same person when you first started doing directing, both of you, or have you changed completely from the point you first started to now?
You want to go, Keith, first?
We'll
change, and I can't answer that at this moment. So you go, Keith, and I'll go after you.
I think for me, it's a great question. I think that everything you do affects you in some way, and not just your life experiences, but creatively when you do things. And being a creative, you're really putting out a lot out there, and especially now that we're also connected online, and you have YouTube and Twitter and so many other places where the audience has direct connection to you as a filmmaker or as a creative, and creatively you're really taking a very personal idea or a personal experience and putting it out there and sharing it with the world. And based on that feedback, some people really respond to that, either positively or negatively. And it's great for the audience to love something, and it's also heartbreaking if somebody crushes you by insulting your work. For me, I started very early in music and then moved into games and then moved into directing. So as a director, this was just my first film and in that space, but having 650 games and other projects over 20 years really gave me a chance to sort of learn the craft and not be influenced by the audience as much as just kind of getting to play in these worlds. So I guess now I am a much different person, because I'm looking at not just the business of it, but kind of giving back to society and kind of hoping that the work that I contribute can help further things in the future, and as well as giving back to actors and the audience in other ways. So I think I've just matured as a human and using the entertainment sort of backbone as doing that. But I think that had I started earlier in life, those projects probably would have affected me in a different way.
Dean, you ready to go, or?
Yeah, I think I fully transmuted too. I think what it comes down to is we're both extremely curious. Everything starts out of curiosity, and then the cause and effect of curiosity in exploring something is, once we've discovered something, then this strange thing happens, which is we become pointers, where we go, look at this thing I've discovered, look at this thing that is really cool, take a look at it, and we're pointing it. That's why you see directors, those stills, they're always pointing. They're pointing over here. We're trying to direct people's attention to something interesting that we feel is valid. And so the other component of that, the third component, is every time we make a movie, we're going up to bad example, but or primitive example, but you're going up to a radio, you're going up to a speaker, and you're saying something. So you better have something to say, because it's a lost opportunity if you don't. So the spaces that we're working in are kind of the fantastical, but that is, like when I think of, for me, the perfect film, which captures everything that I try in every single film and am still striving for desperately, is wonder. And when I see Close Encounters of the Third Kind, it's wonder. That look of opening the door, looking at this light, wonder of what this thing is. And to create that in a movie is just gold. And when you open up people's idea of wonder, you can feed them anything that's positive. It'll resonate. It'll stick much easier than preaching or everything else. So it's finding that line there. But it does. Each film changes you because you'll see actors. I've worked with many actors who, when they're done finishing shooting, they go and they get a haircut. Or they dye their hair. It's kind of like, I need to let that go, that experience happen, shed that skin, and move on to the next. And you carry that, and that's in your tool bag. And as artists, the challenge is every year we have to dump out the tool bag. People don't stay relevant when you hold on closely to that tool bag. This is my shtick. You've got to empty it out every year, and you have to put new stuff in, because every year communication, the way that humans communicate, is different. And the tools in which they use, or the apparatuses they use to take in that communication changes. And so we have to go with it. And if we're lucky, we're right there on the precipice as it's going. I was, 20 years or 10 years too early with UFO abduction. And that wasn't good. You don't want to be too early. So, the timing's got to line up, right? But ultimately, it does change you, and as much as you change it, hopefully.
I got a
Dean,
quick question
hold on,
for you.
Frank. Sorry, Frank. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I did want to, and Dean, thank you very much for having answered that. Really appreciate your insight regarding that. We have a very special guest who's going to join us briefly here for as long as she wishes. She's a wonderful person. She's deeply involved regarding PCB Productions, which is owned by Keith Arem. And this is the wife of Keith, Valerie. And she's involved also, I believe, in voice acting. Is that correct, Valerie?
Yes, good morning. It is correct. I am a voice actor as well as a voiceover talent director.
That's fantastic. Are you also co-owner of PCB Productions?
I am the co-owner. Yes.
Wonderful.
To be fair, she's the boss.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in with a quick question. I'll throw it up
might.
for everybody. And that is, you guys are in the storytelling business. It's what you do for a living. And basically, the entire UFO field is about largely storytelling. A lot of times it's just folks speaking at conferences or doing interview shows like this, but they don't have big budgets and special effects. It's just them telling the story. Now, anybody who's had any kind of a sighting experience or a closer encounter, they want to tell their story. What advice do you have to them in terms of getting things together before they go public with what they've got to say? Do you have any advice for those folks?
Give us the rights to their story.
Give it to you. Okay.
I think they need to be well researched and to be taken credibly. They really need to understand that even if it's a very personal and very sort of challenging thing to be able to bring that out to the public, to come out with that information, that they have to understand that there's always going to be skepticism. There's always going to be criticism. There's going to be doubters on every side. So the more research and the more they understand the context of what they saw, so they can balance out their opinion, the better. So they don't just feel like it doesn't sound like it's coming from someone who doesn't have any understanding of the context of where they saw that.
Valerie, I was going to ask you, could you please let us know a little bit about what you do regarding PCB Productions, just sort of give us a general scope of, everyday activities regarding what you do?
I run and run and run and run and run. No, currently, I am the main talent director here at PCB. So what I do is I direct the voiceover talent who comes into work on our video game titles that are brought to us. So, I've been working on big titles such as like Persona 5 and Monster Hunter World and Catherine and Metro and several other of the really big titles. So what I do is when the actors come in, we put them in the voiceover booth, and I'm the person who sort of directs their performances and make sure that they're consistent with the rest of the game and the rest of the performances we're getting, so that we get like sort of an entire cohesive picture, cohesive storyline.
Do you have any interesting stories from the set to share with us?
Off the top of my head. The people we get to work with on a daily basis are just absolutely fascinating, because they get to go, from booth to booth to booth, being incredibly different people. They can be a child at one moment and then be a giant ogre or a monster the next moment. And so I think the most interesting thing, I don't have a specific story to tell, but I think the most interesting thing is that I get to work with people that are basically human vocal shapeshifters, and it's really fascinating to watch them perfect these things and to grow as we work with them over the past 20 years that we've owned our business, to watch these people go from being unknown to being like some of the top people in the industry, and just watching sort of that growth that happened.
And Valerie's also a voice actor herself. She had started on camera and done modeling, and as she started to help me grow PCB, the other actors and clients absolutely love working with her. And as I've been moving into film and television and these other crazy sort of aspects of our company, she's been really taking over all the game side. And she not only lends her acting background to directing these other actors, but she's been in at least 50 or 100 huge titles herself.
Wow.
And I try to not to be very nepotistic on our projects. I'll always, if she's up for a project, she's always auditioning and doing things outside of me being the director on my projects. So, but she's been on Call of Duty, and she's been on, what are some of the top titles that I think you would talk about?
Call of Duty and Titanfall and Persona 4.
She's the voice of the Batmobile and the arcade game, if you ever see those.
Wow.
And Catwoman.
Yeah.
So I see from looking at your website that you do motion capture there as well. Is that something you started out with, or that you added as you went along? And how did that all come about? And tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, motion capture has really been a great addition to our company, and as well as facial capture. In video games, you don't have the benefit of just putting up a camera and recording an actor. Everything is done with computer-generated models. So that means the body, the face, and the voice are all Frankenstein together into a performance. And you can do traditional, what we call performance capture or motion capture on a big stage, where you have these cameras. We have about 200 cameras on these larger stages. And they're not actually regular cameras that the way you would figure out, like, what you'd see on film or television. These are infrared cameras, and they're only looking for light. So the actors wear these skin tight suits that are very flattering. And they have these little reflective markers on all their joints, on their elbows, on their shoulders, on their wrists. And these 200 cameras on these stages, they only see those points of light. So the actors basically become marionettes. They become these puppeteers that are moving around their characters. And it's an amazing technology. It's different than what you see Pixar. When Pixar does one of their films, their animators hand animate all of their characters by hand. And with motion capture, these actors are actually performing. But the difference is that a lot of the people in the game industry also kind of, they see the way movies are done. They see these great actors coming together and performing together. So a lot of times motion capture sets are sort of emulating film sets, which is a little unfair to the actors, because the actors don't have lighting, or they don't have props, and they don't have costumes. They're on these big giant stages with no props, trying to sort of imagine what these 500-foot creatures are looking like, or these tanks that are rolling in. They're using their imagination, which is a lot of fun. But it's very hard on some of those actors to sort of understand the context and deliver the same kind of performances. So what Valerie and I do here is we sort of dissect the different parts of performances. So the voice, the face, and the body, we sort of treat those equally independently and importantly, and we direct the actors to just do their face. And sometimes we're recording an actor just doing the facial motions without their voice or their body. And then we'll move to a motion capture stage and just capture that motion. And then we'll also go in and do the voice. And so that's what makes our job very interesting and difficult, is that you're asking a very skilled actor to work in a very technical box and sound natural, and say, I need you to come into the soundproof room and I need you to echo repeat a line in 2.34 seconds within 15% of the original mocap material. And you have to do that 100 times an hour in the first or second take. And the actor looks at us and goes, what the hell did you just say?
Yeah, so, that's a painstaking.
Now, Keith, when you did the Phoenix incident, you used a lot of the voice act. I'm assuming a lot of the same people you generally use in the studio. You used a lot of voice actors in that movie.
Yeah, what was interesting was that we knew we had a pretty tight budget and we only had 14 days to shoot the movie. So I really, really needed actors that I could depend on, that I trusted, that I had a shorthand with, that I'd worked on hundreds of games with already. So I could sort of lean on them to really portray characters that were very natural to them and to help us work in a space that, even though it was scripted, we were using a very unscripted sort of methodology of how to get through some of these scenes. So Troy Baker, who has been in The Last of Us and in BioShock, a lot of big games. Travis Willingham, who's now on Critical Role, and he was on Halo. Liam O'Brien, also kind of a newer actor for the film space, but in games he's done hundreds of big games like Oscar's Wrath, and now he's on Critical Role. And Yuri Lowenthal, who he's the new Spider-Man in the new big Sony Spider-Man game, but he was also the Prince of Persia and hundreds of other characters. So these are really seasoned actors that most people in the film and television space don't know what they look like, but any gamer would know that these are some of the top guys working in the space. So I really wanted to bring in very familiar and very skilled actors to help me in this space so we could play for my first film. And I thought that gave me a great backbone to be able to have great performances in this very tight sort of production window that we were going to do.
And how did they like the adjustment going from the controlled environment of a studio to going out and shooting a movie?
Yeah, it was like being on a giant mocap stage, and we shot the scenes just like a mocap set, except for our cameraman became sort of the focal point, and we would have headsets for Brandon Cox, who was our DP, and he would shadow Yuri Lowenthal, the cameraman, basically in the film. And they had this amazing dance that they would work through, and we would do these scenes in 5-minute scenes as opposed to individual cuts. We would actually go through the entire scene together, and it was a great process. And I think that they loved being able to expand what they had done in games and onto camera.
Valerie, wanted to ask you a question and then pose this question to your husband and then also to Dean after that. And that is, I know that you love what you do. I know you probably live it and breathe it every day and probably every night. What do you and your husband do to be able to get away from everything after a while, just to be able to, get a breather from it so you don't burn out?
That's a loaded question.
It's such a loaded question. I like to joke that Keith is my little shark, and if he stops swimming, he'll die. He never stops. So the only thing I found that can make him stop is I have to take him to some middle of the ocean island that has no Wi-Fi, or put him on a cruise ship that goes out into the middle of the ocean where we have absolutely no connection to the outside world, because it's literally the only way I can make him stop working. Oh. And the funny thing is that every time I've done that, he'll usually sit there and write a new script or something. So it's not like he entirely stops working. It's just he stops doing our day-to-day and then focuses more on the creative of it.
Right.
Yeah, for me, my brain just doesn't turn off if you can't tell. Yeah,
right.
It's a curse and a blessing, because when I get an idea, I can't stop until I get that idea out of my head, whether it's visually or sharing it with someone. Even Ascend, that first book I did, it was a dream. Val took me up to the Arctic Circle with our brand new baby daughter Julia, and she's like, how old was she? She was like 6 months. 6 months old. We're on this little boat up in the Arctic Circle, away from email, away from the internet, away from anything. And I wake up in the middle of the night and I just dreamt the entire movie and the entire book. And I would always have these big dreams like this about once a year, but I would always lose them because I'd wake up and I'd fall back asleep and then I'd just sort of forget about it. And this time I knew I couldn't lose this story. And so it's this an inside cabin in this little boat. And I shook her awake at like 4 a.m, pitch black. Our daughter is like sound asleep.
I was like, this better be good because the 6-month-old is asleep and so was I.
Right.
You're going to have to earn this one.
And like for half an hour, I just tell her this dream, this giant war, the purgatory wars, and these angels that are harvesting these souls to be in this giant war, and these brothers that are caught in the middle of this whole thing. And I just told her the whole story. And at the end of this story, she's silent. And I kind of lean in because I can't see her because it's pitch black. And I said, did you fall back asleep? And she was like in stunned silence. And she said, you just dreamt all of that? And I was like, well, I didn't have that when we went to bed a few hours ago. And but then I couldn't get those images out of my head.
I didn't know whether to be excited or terrified that all that.
Well, and that just goes to show you can't even sleep to get away from it. You're working in your sleep.
Yes,
But
I think all my best stories have come that way. Yeah.
he goes to place when he sleeps and grabs these little nuggets of things and brings them back.
Yeah, let me,
Right.
before you jump back to Dean, let me jump in with Keith really quick. Yeah. And that is regarding just the graphic novel form. If you've got an idea for a story, that seems like that's about the lowest tech approach that you can take to get that story told and get that out there. And can you just talk about the form a little bit? It seems like it's very inclusive, that pretty much anybody really has a shot at it if they think they've got a good story.
It's the absolute best way to take an idea and really flesh it out. It's not the best way to sort of dive into the in-depth personalities and characters because it is more of a visual medium than it is from a storytelling dialogue perspective. But what it does allow you to do is that if you're envisioning a world and characters and the interaction and sort of the arc of a story, you and another artist or just yourself, you can sort of envision what a giant war between heaven and hell is going to look like. If you're going to envision an armada of spaceships attacking a planet, an artist can draw that without a whole team of visual effects animators and a whole studio to do a scene. Just an artist can visualize that. So what would normally be storyboards or just stick figures of deciding what an idea is going to be, a graphic novel, you can really establish an idea and put it out there. And for me, it's absolutely the best way to start off with a project because you can now share that with someone, show them the pacing, the characters, the world, and then use that to then develop it. You can't make any money off doing it, unfortunately, because the industry is very difficult, and hopefully we're finding some new ways to change that. But it is absolutely the best way, I think, for me as a storyteller to start the beginning of an idea.
And Dean, how do you get away from it all?
I don't have a husband, so I'm not sure how he. It's you never get away. That's the problem. Never, ever. We're driving, and Allie, my girlfriend, will tell you I'm like thinking on something, and I see something on the street or whatever, and that gets a domino effect going, and and then it's like I have to tell her I've got to. That's the first level of realization of it is speaking it to someone else. Many a time I've done the same thing. It's not really cool that we do that, but I'll do the same thing in the morning. If I can wait until the morning, and I'll hit Allie with an idea that I have, and then it's kind of usually after you have coffee, you can tell if the idea has some legs to it. Sometimes it's just one aspect of it, but usually when it comes hard and fast. I always look at way back before like Socrates and Plato, the term having a muse was a real thing. They considered that, someone who was really good in some field, they would say, well, their muse must be very powerful. And in fact, those artists or those, whatever their field was, they would give credit to the muse. And then at some point they stopped doing that. I still like to give credit to them because I know when something comes and you're like, Keith can, relate to this, I'm sure, and same with Valerie. It hits you and you're like, where the hell did that come from? And then your job is there's a portal that is opened up between up above or whatever your muse is hitting you, and it doesn't stay open forever. So I always say to up and coming filmmakers and stuff, ask for advice. I say when you hit that, you stop everything and you go, you run, and you get it out as quick as possible. Don't spend a year writing a script. Get it all out because it's going to close up. So you know.
It sounds like Allie and I need to take a girls' weekend.
And one thing that I want to say is when I met Keith at AlienCon, he had the best booth there. I mean, it was Jesus. It was the Keith and Valerie show. Let's just call it what it is. Beautiful. And I was across the way. And what was most impressive wasn't the huge backdrop that he had. It was the teamwork between he and Valerie and their kids. They were there. And to see this, like, you know, this kind of nouveau mom and pop organization that was all pulling in together. I mean, they're all, you know, they're all striving for the same thing. They all have, you know, again, wonder. It's like they're doing this adventure together. And it's very admirable. And you know, their kids are going to benefit greatly from them and from this. And so that was, yeah.
What's kind of funny about that is that if our kids now are growing up pretty fast, and even though they may want to join the business at some point, you really see that they've sort of inherited a lot of our energy and madness. And but I've always felt that people need to do what they love to do, and that should be their careers. It's not what they have to do, not what they're being paid to do, but what they love to do. And that's what was for me for music. And even to this day, I really still feel like I'm just playing in my hobby. But what was interesting is our daughter, Julia, who's 17, is this unbelievable baker. She loves to bake. It's just something for her, just puts her in her zone. She just loves what she does. And she discovered that she had a thyroid condition where she couldn't really have wheat or soy, but she loved to bake. And how do you do that? So she started researching all these different sort of ingredients and other things. And she came up with these cupcakes that are these like just gluten-free gourmet things. But being in a world where we're surrounded by celebrities and video games and movies and pop culture. And she loves it as much as she's a fan, as much as she is working in the industry. And so what's funny is that you see all this work that we put into our video games and our movies and the promotion in our booths. And so our daughter came up with this company at 17. It's called Naked Bakes. And what's hilarious is, I mean, and Val came up with the slogan for it.
It's naked of gluten, naked of soy, fully dressed in flavor.
That's great.
So at 17, she's the CEO of this cupcake company that just launched about
3 weeks ago, or 3 months ago.
About 3 months ago. And now she's been at DreamWorks. She's at Universal. She's been at she just did a social event this weekend.
Botanical Gardens down like Palos Verdes, that area.
And if you go to her site, so it's really funny. If you look at my stuff and you're like, okay, you guys doing video games, he's doing movies. But if you go to my daughter's site and her Instagram's now blowing up and everything, if you go to nakedbakes.com, and I'm not doing a shameless plug, it's just I'm just so proud of what she's.
You want her? Please say it a few times.
Yeah, so
now that she's made it, when Alejandro calls and says, "What's up with the cupcake?"
That's right. And so it's so funny because so what Dean was talking about is that our family really does operate as a unit, and we're at Comic-Con this week, and the whole the family's coming out. They work the booth. People are always saying, well, you know, you got to make yourselves a little bit unobtainable. Let other people work the front of the booth, and you come out and do the autographs and the signings. And we're like, hell no, we're going to be out there with the fans, meeting everybody every day, because we love that interaction and getting the feedback from the fans. And our kids have been there since they were kids, since they were little, and they're still working the booth.
Want to know the name of her website again, please?
Yes, so it's Naked Bakes.
Naked, like no clothes, naked?
As in naked, yes.
It was
Naked Bakes?
Naked Bakes. Her idea for the naked was that it was
nakedbakes.com. Okay, I see it now. Okay,
Can you send me a small bio and everything on that so I can explain it to the listeners when I promote it with this podcast?
Absolutely.
Okay, that would be good.
Working for our kids. We're all going to be working for our kids.
Right. I was just going to say she's going to end up being the millionaire out of all of us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's actually just one thing to point out. What Dean just said is that's exactly what it is. Yeah. As hard as I was working since the time I was a kid, I never knew why I was working so hard. I had all these ideas and I loved working. But the moment that Val and I decided to have kids, it suddenly clicked, and I realized that we're doing this for them, and not in just like a sort of a charity way. It's just sort of everything you're doing is to sort of help them grow their lives, and that's not meant to be patronizing. It's just sort of like I now have a reason to work hard because I want to make a better life for them.
And if she's really successful, she'll be able to finance your movies.
Right, she'll she'll be supporting you.
That's a lot of cupcakes.
Valerie, I do have a special request of your daughter. What's her name, by the way?
Julia.
Julia, that's a beautiful name. Could you please tell her to make some UFO cupcakes?
That's a great idea.
I'm sure she will.
We would appreciate that. By the way, before we wrap this up, and I do have to ask Frank, if he has any more questions.
Yeah, I do have one last one that was sticking in my head.
I do have a last question after you ask that.
Okay. One for all three of you, actually. When you go into the idea of making a movie, you've got an idea for a movie, but this is going to be a project that's going to take a while. It might take years for it to come to fruition. Is there a tipping point? Is there something at some point a little voice tells you that, yeah, this is the idea. There's a movie here. I'm going to go for it? Because I'm sure, for every good idea, there might have been 2 or 3 that you tossed away. So if you could talk a little bit about that system, that process, that would be great.
Yeah, Dean, you take this one.
Oh, crap. Okay. Here's the thing. Whenever you get one of those ideas, automatically a couple dozen people in LA get the same idea. So you're racing to get it done. You're racing to uphold what was great about the idea and keep it consistent. But boy, those are almost like mirages, man. You get them and it's like, oh my God, this is total zeitgeist. And I've run with a few of those, and I did this one. I work also. I've done a couple superhero scripts, and one of them was this teenage character, dark. Kind of like Heathers meets a Spider-Man, and he had these elastic powers, and so I was able to get through a buddy of mine that was rep to this big agency. I was able to get it out there, and literally the week before it was going to go out to Sony, Paramount, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, Spielberg announced that he was going to do Plastic Man, and so no one wanted to compete with Spielberg. I don't know why, but
I can't imagine.
Yeah, and so it all came back, and it was like no one wants to do that, and so thanks for playing, and that was it. And then the rub is that they never made the movie, and so I think when it does come, it'll let you know. You just have to kind of pay attention and be open, and that's half of it is being open and receptive, especially dream life. I mean, don't underestimate the subconscious because it's working for us.
And a lot of times your idea is ahead of its time, where it's the right idea, but it just isn't the right time for the audience. And they used to say that from script to screen for a movie was 7 years. And it's very true in some respects, is that if you have an idea and you want to get something made, there's a lot of challenges, not just from a financing standpoint, but also just distribution and getting it out there to the audience. And even what I experienced with Phoenix, I got the movie out in 2016, and now the stuff that happened with Undisclosed and the History Channel and the Nimitz coming out in 2017, 2018, the movie was just a year or two ahead of its time for hitting that wave of the public's awareness of what it was trying to say. So sometimes you might have a great idea, but there's just not the audience ready for it. So as a filmmaker, I think you have all these stories floating in your head. And that's what's so overwhelming for film executives and people that are meeting with people like Dean and myself and Val, where we have all these great ideas and we're just spewing ideas. And they're like, whoa, how do you pick what you're working on? Why don't you just focus on one? And the problem is it's impossible to focus on one, because if you put all your eggs in one basket, you'll never get ahead, and you'll be waiting 7 years for that picture.
Yeah, and just to follow up, the turnaround time on the Unidentified TTSA show, basically DeLong and his team announced the project in October of 2017, and the show basically wraps up in early July of 2019. So you're talking maybe a year and 3/4 roughly from the start of the project to actually getting the show done and getting 6 installments run on cable. Would you say that's a pretty good turnaround time? It seems to me like it is based on what you're telling me.
That is a quick turnaround time, but also it doesn't have to be that way. Spielberg did the post in 10 months from agreeing to do the script to going to screen in 10 months time. That is moving almost at the speed of thought, at speed of creativity, let's say. And so Keith and I are, we're always interested in how do we get it not only to the audience, because every idea, even the worst idea, has a huge audience. There has a certain section, a cross-section of people who love that. So it's a matter of bridging that gap and going directly to them and getting it out there. And the fact is, technology has never been, first of all, it's the most expensive art form in the history of mankind. And so to have technology where you can get your DSLR camera, I did a $5,000 film a couple years ago and did this thing, and it was all done, edited and everything within 4 months. So technically that could have gone to market. And so it was just me. It was a very small, crew, but it is possible to do it. The only problem is that you have to intersect with the people who have the yeses. And so depending on how big your budget is, that's the duration of how long it's going to take to get out there traditionally.
Okay. And that's why you're seeing
sorry.
Yeah, well, you're seeing an intersection, right? Because you're seeing games now being a $140 billion industry and outselling music and television and film and everything combined. But the development time of a big game, like a console game, is 3 years. And as Dean was saying, is that you can produce a film. The actual production of a film, even a big blockbuster film, is 14 to 18 months. So if you have a 3-year video game and a 14-month motion picture, they don't line up. So if you're getting a giant movie out, you really have to go backwards in time and make sure that you're planning out your video game and all your other launches to go forward. But that being the case, the production time is not really what holds up the movie. It's what Dean was saying. It's sort of the yes people to agree to finance and distribute and promote and market and get your project out there. And that's unfortunately what's really hurt filmmakers is there's such a saturation of great talented people out there that the distributors and the people who are really holding the purse strings and the distribution strings, really it's a buyer's market for them, and they can really pick and choose what they want to be able to push forward.
And one more follow up, then back to you, Chant. Basically, let's say that I'm a TV executive, and I'm coming to you, Dean and Keith, and I'm asking guys. There's this great sighting case that I've been following, and I want to do a TV special about it. 1 hour, that's it. But, I know who the witnesses are. I've got more or less everything lined up for you. You've got to go out and shoot it and get it done and get it ready for broadcast ASAP. Here's the check, whatever it is. It's good enough for you guys. How quickly could you get something like that turned around?
Super quick. Like that if you're at that stage right there, that's going to happen in a matter of months.
Here's the check makes that go much faster.
Yeah, having the check in hand. Yeah, that's what we look for, right? We can turn that around very quickly.
Okay, it would still take months though, not weeks, let's say.
You could. Obviously, if you have the right resources and the right locations and everything set up, you could turn that around in weeks. With today's technology and be able to do that, absolutely. Even with post.
Okay, are you all ready for my question? It's the last question.
Yes.
It's a biggie. My question is going to be posed to Valerie first, then Keith, then Dean. And my question for you, Valerie, which is the same for everybody else, what is your takeaway regarding everything you've done having to do with the company PCB Productions that you and your husband own together from the point of its inception until right now? And by the way, just so our listeners know, they're currently getting ready. We're very lucky to have them on today because they're in the midst of getting ready for something else tomorrow, which you can mention what it is if you'd like, Keith, but or Valerie. But Valerie, what is your takeaway regarding everything you've done? What's the moral of the story for you? What have you learned from everything that you've been involved in regarding what you and your husband are involved in.
That's your quick last question?
Yes, that's my last question.
Well, to mention what we're doing before we're getting ready to, we have a booth at San Diego Comic-Con next week. So we're getting ready to go down there and get that all set up for the week.
And not just a booth, it's the biggest one we've ever done.
Yeah, so it's our new
15 years.
biggest booth, and this should be interesting.
She says with her eye twitching.
A little eye twitch there. Okay. I think the takeaway is to do what you love, do it with integrity, and surround yourself with good people. There's no time to work with people who are bad energy or bad attitudes, because it just eats away at your creativity and it eats away at the positive experience. And in the end, it's not about the end result. It really is about the journey to get there. Because if you spend 3 years toiling away at something and it's absolute hell, then who cares if the end process comes out great? It was 3 years of your life that you don't get back, that you spent, with negativity or bad energy or, not wanting to do it. So I think it's really about having that positive journey. And if the journey is positive, I think that the results will always come out well.
Yeah, we have this saying here that when people say that the end justifies the means, we don't subscribe to that, because if you have a successful project, but it was a nightmare getting there, we don't want any part of that, because for us, it's all about the means that justifies the end. The idea that your day-to-day is awesome. I get to work every day with my wife, my family's here. I get to see my kids grow up. I get to work with some of the most amazing, talented performers in the world as a result of working on these big projects. And it's an amazing, magical thing for us. And it's inspiring every day, because we really genuinely love what we do and we love the people we're working with. And the moment we have someone, and we've had a couple over the 20 years, you can count them on less than one hand, but we've had a few people that just, when they bring a negativity or some kind of just side agenda to the table, life is too short, and for us, we just want to really, like Valerie said, work with good people and be inspired by those people that re-inspire the artwork that we're producing. And I think that's the real takeaway, is that at the end of the day, it really is what we did to get there. And it's been a great journey. And that's why, this year in October, Val and I are celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary. And we've been together for 20
I'm taking him to an island again.
Yeah, she's literally taking me to an island and we're just going away. But that's it, because, Val and I have been a team the whole way. And now that she's sort of taking over PCB on the game side and the studios and allowing me to just, be my shark self and kind of go and create these projects and have madness. It's been a good process, and we love it. And our kids are now getting to the point where they're going to go off to college and have their own adventures.
That's fantastic. Dean?
Yeah, I have to underscore what Val and Keith said 100%. Having been in a few bands before, that is kind of the perfect analogy. The chemistry of a band is critical, because you're trying to create something that's going to play at a certain harmony, a certain level. And it just takes one person to throw you off. I mean, I may not be the fanciest drummer, and on my best day, I scrape the bottom of just okay, but I can keep a beat. And if the chemistry isn't right, and there's someone in the band that has some strange agenda that isn't, all for one and one for all, and serving the arts, there's a line of here to New York of people who do this for free. If they're doing that, I sometimes will have, I find that it's hard for me to, keep on beat. It's like I'm that's as kind of a blatant example as you can get, where it's like I'm just not feeling the vibe. And so life is, as I said, way too short. So you try to find people that, you don't have to have all the answers. And so my goal is you can stand taller when a bunch of you, are all holding that pyramid and you're all standing together. And it's fun, because it's such a joke. As writers, we're trying to say that we're psychic, that we can see in the crystal ball that what we wrote is going to be perfectly executed on the set, identically to what's been written, and then edited. And the thing that's fun is you get out there and the actors are bringing their own crystal ball, and you're all pulling together this whole big thing that becomes even greater. And so the more you listen, the more you're open, the greater, the more in-depth you have. so it just becomes this snowball that goes. And if you're smart, you let people do what they do best, and try to. Your job is only to steer them in the right direction.
Thank you. I would like to thank everybody for having been on our show today. Valerie, Arem, and Keith, Arem, and Dean Alioto. We look forward to having you on our show again. And we wish you luck, Valerie and Keith, regarding where you're going. You said San Diego, right?
Yeah, for Comic-Con.
Comic-Con, yeah. And Dean, please keep us updated on everything you're doing. And Frank, did you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're in a very exciting time. I mean, I am Mr. Negativity. I am Mr. Bad Vibes. But as far as this UFO stuff goes, we are in an amazing time. And all three of you are a tremendous resource for people who are interested in the field, just to listen to what the pros have to say about telling those stories, communicating them effectively, and just building this community and getting more information out there so everybody else can kind of plug in and hopefully move this thing forward.
Thank you for enlightening us.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, thank you for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
Absolutely,
We appreciate
absolutely.
you. And Valerie, I better ask this before you guys leave. I know you're going to be busy for a long time, but Valerie, can I have the privilege of interviewing you and your daughter?
Oh, we'd love that. Absolutely. Thank
Good.
you.
They're going to talk to her daughter's agent.
I am my daughter's agent.
I will get back to you later on that. But
Yep.
thank you very much for having
And,
allowed us the privilege and honor of interviewing all of you.
And we will turn it around and be right back tomorrow night with Buddy from Alien Protocols, where we are going to talk about the Psychic Olympics we're going to attempt to hold on this show, real-time psychic experiments that should be bulletproof in terms of protocol. The results, well, we'll see how they go. That'll be the fun part. But we're going to try to get the protocols down in terms of doing some psychic experiments live on the podcast. And we're going to do that tomorrow night. And that should be fun, a little bit of an experiment. So thanks for joining us. And yes, Dean, you absolutely can be in the Psychic Special Olympics. Yep, no doubt about it. Yeah, seriously, yeah, we're looking for contestants. So yeah, we definitely want to do that. And we're putting together some games where be sort of like a Price is Right type of thing, where there are a few different games within the larger game. So we're going to go for it. That's going to be a lot of fun. Experiment. Maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't work. But that's part of the fun of doing all this. So goodbye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we will be back tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.